we don't need to be protected from the internet. And just the name of this bill, the online safety bill, why do we need to be safe? And how can viewing something, even something you find, disturbing, why does this make you in any way unsafe?
Well, welcome to the IEA London YouTube channel. My name is Marc Littlewood. I'm the Director General here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the free market think tank. And we're doing a series of interviews about the year in review, 2022 in review. And for this instalment, I'm joined by my good friend and the head of cultural affairs at the IEA, Marc Glendening. You're a very cultured person.
I am indeed, none more cultured, in fact.
But by cultural affairs, what we mean, Marc, is what's now dubbed the culture wars and freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and controversial views or opinions being banned or cancelled or stamped out. And this has become your cause celeb here at the IEA. You're worried that the culture wars are spelling a reduction in freedom.
Well, absolutely, because the contemporary, what I call culture control left, they have added to their desire for economic regulation and redistribution, state regulation of what we are allowed to communicate and express culturally. So they are much more dangerous, in my view, than the traditional old left, many of whom, social democrats, say were at least politically liberal. They believed in free speech and that sort of stuff.
And so let's look at a bit of what's happened in 2022 from the free speech angle or the culture angle. Start with the online safety bill, right? So this is a state-run enterprise brought forward by the Conservative government, which is trying to make sure that people aren't sort of distressed or upset by what they see online. So have I got this right? There's going to be a new criminal offence of causing severe emotional stress.
Distress.
That will be judged by the distress as judged by the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. There was initially going to be a provision of material that was legal but harmful would be prohibited. But I understand that terminology has been removed from the bill.
Well, we might want to discuss that.
Well, we do want to discuss this.
Yeah.
So
not what it seems.
So tell me about this online safety bill. What's all this about, and what constitutes severe emotional distress, and what is is it a great victory for freedom that saying something that is legal but harmful is now allowed under the criminal law?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say about this is that it is literally incredible that Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries and now Rishi have agreed to implement this measure, which has long been campaigned for by the New Left. So back in the 70s, there was a Marxist campaign led by a Labour MP called Clive Sorrell, which was called the Press and Broadcasting Freedom Campaign, or the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom, which wanted state regulation of newspapers.
Right.
And then we've had, obviously, campaigns like Hacked Off and the Media Reform Coalition campaigning for the same thing, but now, of course, extending it to the internet. And a Conservative government is now delivering what the left has long wanted, which is
incredible. Right. But my job here is obviously not, I mean, I agree with you, but my job is to play devil's advocate. My job is obviously to play devil's advocate a bit here. So there are restrictions on what you can say, or at least on what you can say without consequence. Already. I mean, obviously the famous example that's always trotted out is you can't stand up and shout fire in a theatre in the middle of a play. Well, you can, but there will be consequences if you do that. We have libel laws in this country about, if you say something which is completely false about somebody and traduce their reputation, you face damages from that.
Well, I think Liberals should think about that quite closely, but that's a separate issue.
There are restrictions. I mean, you don't believe in freedom of speech to the extent that people should be able to say whatever they want without consequence? Is that, or do you think people should be able to say whatever they want without consequence?
I think individuals should be able to say whatever they believe, to pass judgment on others and to others without any restriction whatsoever. It's not for the state to tell you and me what we can impart to each other, aggressively or otherwise. I think the only restrictions there should be on what we communicate should be forms of speech that relate to very material other regarding acts, such as fraud or conspiracy to murder. Beyond that, once you give the state license to prosecute people because of the information they're trying to impart or the ethical opinions they're trying to express, then you really are on the proverbial slippery slope, because it then just comes down to what are your subjective likes and dislikes, and you're giving license to those in power to prosecutors for causing emotional distress as they judge it. And that's what is going to happen. You could go to jail for 2 years, Marc, for upsetting somebody.
Well, I expect to be arrested.
The judgment of the CPS.
I expect to be arrested at any moment in that case.
Yes.
Is what's happening here, what we're sort of seeing is the disintegration of the establishment media. So, it used to be the case back in the day that we would just get our information from the BBC and the Times of London, and although these weren't heavily regulated, these are the authoritative sources. And what we've seen is a technological explosion on platforms like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube of sort of anyone can now be a journalist, right? Which is a good thing. I mean, I kind of welcome that. But it causes people concerns about misinformation and all sorts of conspiracy theories. Our enemy countries, deliberately telling us, I don't know, not to get a vaccine or some such like. And do you think that, should we treat these platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube as publishers or as just part of the public square? I mean, are they basically newspapers, or are they just walls on which anyone can graffiti?
Well, I think they're a combination of the two, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you don't want to expose yourself to QAnon theories about vaccines, then just don't go into the worldwide interweb. Stay away from it. It's a bit like, in the 1970s when I was growing up, sort of authoritarian Christian conservatives were always going on about the need to, erase smut, as they used to call it, sort of the Mary Whitehouse type people. And I couldn't understand why they were so bothered about me or anybody else looking at mainlining some smut. If they did, it wasn't to their cup of tea to see some,
then don't
Swedish porno movie. Then they didn't have to go to Soho. So why is anybody? Why do we need protection?
I want to hear more about your life growing up in Soho. Right.
Well, I mean, my favourite film was Danish Dentist on the Job. But anyway, that's a very strange, but niche,
very niche
movie of its genre. But moving on from that rapidly, we don't need to be protected from the internet. And just the name of this bill, the online safety bill. Why do we need to be safe? And how can viewing something, even something you find disturbing, which presumably you don't have to continue looking at it if you do find it disturbing. Why does this make you in any way unsafe?
Okay, so here's my follow-up question. Who will think of the children? And oftentimes I think this argument
I know this concerns you a great deal. I can see in your eyes.
But I think oftentimes restrictions, where I would have sympathy, are about protecting people under the age of consent from harmful. I mean, we don't let 10-year-olds consume alcohol in pubs. We don't let 8-year-olds go and buy cigarettes from a newsagent. And given that youngsters today, below the age of majority, still forming their ideas, vulnerable human beings, you might call them, have access to everything on their iPhone, nothing like as clear cut as when you and I were lads, that sort of the television watershed on the 2 television channels, the 3 television channels that exist was 9 o'clock, and you know, this might not be suitable for children. Now, a kid with an iPhone or a laptop, and they've basically all got all of them, can suddenly access all of this stuff. Whether it be smart or concerns about their mental health, you know, they're feeling suicidal.
God, not that one. We'll come on to that.
But I mean, you know, how do we, in a world which I guess liberal-minded people might welcome, that there's suddenly sort of vast amounts of information at everybody's fingertips, any issues at all about under 18s being able to get all of this stuff?
No, absolutely not. I mean, they used to say, didn't they, that the last resort of a bounder was to engage in jingoistic, patriotic rhetoric. Well, now the last resort of a bounder is to evoke the kiddies as a justification for essentially regulating what adults can see. Because if you're going to go down this totalitarian road of trying to control what children and young people can see, that by definition is going to impact
well, what about
on what
like
adults you can't. The genie is out of the technological bottle now, and the only way you're going to be able to enforce all this stuff that the kiddie protectors are demanding is in fact to compromise the rights of adults, to sacrifice us on the altar of child vulnerability.
Why not have an age verification process, right? The minute I can establish I am over the age of 18, perhaps I don't always act as if I'm over the age of 18, but I can establish that I am. At this point, I type that in, I prove it onto the internet that I am, and now I can access everything. I can gamble, I can watch smut, that's fine, you're an adult. But a 12 or 13-year-old kid, you might not want to give them that access to. Shouldn't it not be a bit the same as we have certification of movies? You know, back in the day, if you or at a pub, you know, you need to show I am 18. Why would you not apply that age verification process to online?
Well, I'm not very au fait with technological matters.
But just supposing it can be done as a matter of principle.
But yes, okay, maybe if that could be done without in any way affecting what you and I can Google and download.
Well, we would need to establish.
But I think principally it shouldn't really be for the state to be regulating children. Right. I think that's up to their parents. And that is a sort of private matter. I'm really concerned about the way in which the state is now trying to intervene. And you have this in other contexts with relationship education. There's quite a lot of very sinister moves afoot. The Scottish government is going to appoint a state-appointed guardian to every child to report on it.
I thought that was struck down, but
no, it hasn't. They're still planning to do it. It's just that the Labour Party are confused about it and haven't yet said they're going to support it. The Conservatives obviously have opposed it in Scotland. But yeah, so there's a lot of moves to actually transform the state into some sort of quasi joint parent. Right. And I think this is all part of it.
Okay. Why do you think, I mean, we at the IEA are a non-partisan outfit, but why do you think that those that you might consider to be on the small L liberal side of this argument, pro-freedom of speech, parents' job to look after the children, not the state's job, very important that views of all sorts, even views that the vast majority of us consider to be offensive or wrong, can be broadcast in the public arena. Why have a Conservative government bought into this sort of language of we must stop severe emotional distress, material which is technically legal but might be considered harmful by the police needs to be sort of, stopped. Safety and harm are the watchwords of the modern world. There's, everybody's a vulnerable person rather than a resilient person. Why has this become so, I wouldn't go so far as say unanimous, but right across the mainstream of politics, this is now the normal lexicon and nomenclature. Why aren't those who are on, I guess, what you would traditionally call the centre-right of politics going absolutely bananas about this?
It's a very good question. I mean, there are obviously honourable individuals like Kemi Badenoch who said had she become Prime Minister, she would have scrapped this bill. David Davis, but very, very few conservatives on principle now really believe in free speech. As you say, the vast majority of them are now really indistinguishable from Blairite, New Labour people. They've bought the whole kind of new left philosophical analysis of society. And I think some of them, it may be a hangover from the sort of authoritarian conservative tradition, whereby quite a lot of conservatives instinctively like the idea
of things like blasphemy laws or whatever.
Yeah, but they can't have that now. That's all, you know, that's all gone, been and gone. The Mary Whitehouse agenda can't now be enacted. So some of them are actually like sort of Theresa May type people who are once trad, C of E, you know, conservative types of a small c, have now just bought into this culture of control because they instinctively like the idea of safety, and they don't fully understand where this is going to go in the hands of the new left. I mean, just wait till Starmer becomes Prime Minister. I mean, he's even planning to make it a criminal offence not to use people's preferred pronouns. Right. Now, most of these conservatives wouldn't go along with that. Right.
But that's the
next they're sort of, broadly speaking, I suppose they're what Lenin would have called useful idiots now, most of these people. I mean, sort of Theresa May is a useful idiot to the new left.
Just want to finish on this general principle surrounding this, because you're painting an incredibly worrying picture of, you know, the state's controlling even more. You won't be able to say this, you won't be able to see that. Irrespective of public policy, though, it seems to me freedom of speech on, if you like, a practical level is enormously enhanced over my lifetime. I mean, when I was a kid, Frankie Goes to Hollywood's #1 single, Relax, was banned from the airwaves. I think The Life of Brian, the Monty Python film, was, you know, it took until the late 1980s before it was broadcast on television for fear that it offended blasphemy law. Now, everybody at the click of a button can access pretty much everything that they want, can say anything they want on platforms like Twitter or YouTube.
Well, can they? Yeah.
Well, certainly more than they could have done. Like you know, you can be your own amateur journalist. You can run your own blog. These would have been very difficult things in practical terms for people to have accessed back in the 1970s and the 1980s. Actually, what's happening at the sort of grassroots level is, thanks to technology, not thanks to public policy, we've got an explosion in free expression, haven't we? And the idea that a Monty Python film would be banned from television, I mean, even if it was, you'd be...
Well, it would be now. I think they wouldn't show The Life of Brian because they've made... There are anti-trans jokes, early anti-trans jokes.
But then go and get it on Netflix or something. I mean...
Well, I mean, this is... I think you're absolutely right that there was this explosion in terms of capacity for free speech. But this bill and legislation being passed by the Chinese government, virtually every government in the world now, is actually going to try to take us back to an age when, in fact, these kind of things are not accessible, and individuals are put on sort of Chinese social credit type lists whereby they won't be allowed onto the internet, or they'll be kept off the platforms. Right. And this kind of legislation is designed to do that. So I think you were right. The internet was, a hugely anarchic, wonderful explosion of free expression. But governments of all types, regardless of what they call themselves, Chinese Communist Party, the British Conservative Party, are now regulating the internet. And, the BBC themselves are saying, we won't show things like Little Britain ever again. We're going to erase it. The League of Gentlemen, all the kind of good, edgy stuff that was appearing 20, 15 years ago. You're not going to be able to see it. You'll have to go into some sort, I don't know if you can go into the dark web. Well, exactly,
Okay. Well, you're depressing me quite a lot about the state of the world in 2022 and beyond, but maybe there's a chink of optimism here. The freedom of speech bill. So I think that this whole issue of cancel culture at universities, this sort of began a bit in America, but we've caught the American disease. You can't possibly have this person on a platform. It will cause unbelievable emotional distress and harm to the assembled student body if somebody like Jermaine Greer or Peter Tatchell, or was it Amber Rudd, I think, was cancelled, wasn't she?
Yes, I think rightly probably in her case, how awful she is, but yeah.
There's been a concern at university level that rather than exposing people to a vast range of different ideas, some of which may be offensive to a considerable number of people, we're now all about making sure they're not offended and, oh dear, we can't possibly have this person. And I say, I think you're joking a bit about Amber Rudd. I mean, the idea that she's beyond the...
I was semi-joking.
But, I mean, I can remember when I was at university, there was some issue about, was it David Irving, the denier?
Yes.
I think he was cancelled. That was considered beyond the pale. But
I think he appeared at the Oxford or the Cambridge Union.
Might have been.
They
I can't
stood
recall.
firm on free speech there.
Generally speaking, people of, definitely Enoch Powell spoke at the Oxford Union when I was there in the 1990s without, some people might have booed him, but there was no suggestion that he should not be allowed to take the stage. So we've got this cancel culture sort of going on in which the most important thing over your 3 or 4 years at university is that you're not offended rather than that you learn anything. And this kind of industry of offence, people going around looking for things to be offended about. Right?
Well, like Mary Whitehouse.
Rather than sort of we're here to learn. But so this freedom of speech bill was initially, I think again it's been watered down a bit, but the idea was to legally require universities to expound freedom of speech and that they would face penalties if these sort of people were cancelled. That if you wanted to run a university in which you said Amber Rudd is beyond the pale and must never speak at this distinguished place of learning, some sort of penalty would kick in or you could be sued for it. Should we enforce freedom of speech on these sort of institutions? Why don't we just leave it to each university to decide what their rules are?
Well, that is my actual inclination, certainly with regard, obviously, to private sector institutions. So you might not agree with, say, the Carlton Club, turning itself into a conservative, safe space and say, no socialist opinions must ever be heard within the environs of our institution. Okay, fair enough, they're a private club. That's fine. I mean, universities are obviously hybrid.
It's a weird
they're
mix.
partly public sector and they get taxpayer money. They're given the legal right to issue degrees, and if they didn't have that, then they wouldn't exist. So it seems to me that that's a very complicated environment in which to try to enforce free speech. And so the strategy I would prefer to see the government using is not to pass a piece of legislation saying you've got to have free speech, but it's simply to say to universities, first of all, they should close down their student unions. They shouldn't be given any public money whatsoever. If students want to band together to create a private students' union, which can have whatever bans on, use of the word woman, say, then fine, they can do that. But they're not getting any taxpayers' money. I don't see why you and I should be financing these institutions, which are then in turn asymmetrically censoring people who happen to be Christians or feminists or whatever it is they don't like at that particular moment. So I think the government's legislation is cack-handed. I don't see how you can create a tort in terms of people suing because they've been denied.
But you could tie it to the money, right? You could
tie it to the money.
So
that's exactly it.
So you will not be eligible for. You and I might be of the view that there shouldn't be any state grants to universities anyway. But if there are going to be state grants, you might say that you will have to have a particular code of conduct in order to receive the money. If you don't want to receive the money, do what you want. If you do want this state support, you're going to have to do A, B, and C. That would be the smart way.
Absolutely, and I think this piece of legislation is probably unenforceable, and it's being watered down now, and it'll probably have no effect.
I want to wrap up by asking you about, is there a fight back happening here? I mean, you've been, it's been a pretty grim year all round, really. Everybody I'm speaking to of our sort of persuasion is, oh my God, it's all terrible. The state's getting bigger and more intrusive. But do you think, in terms of the public discourse about this, that there is beginning to be a fight back in favour of freedom? That even if it's not manifested in terms of what the exact law should be, but that it's preposterous that J.K. Rowling is going to be cancelled because of her particular views.
Or now prosecuted, possibly in Scotland.
Right, yeah. The state might do this, but the great British public are with this up we will not put, right? Or consider it preposterous that these things are banned from television or whatever. Do you think there is a fight back emerging now that could stop the overreach of the state into what we can say, what we can read and what we can watch? Or are we still on the back foot?
I think that the situation is confused. You're absolutely right that the vast majority of people agree with us. So in Scotland, 80% of the population, I think, when polled, said they were against the Scottish government's new hate speech law, which now makes it a criminal offence, potentially, to have a private conversation. Mm-hmm. So the vast majority of Scots are against that, but the vast majority of them do not make that the basis on which they wrap up all their preferences into one single vote. Mm-hmm. So our problem is that while there is undoubtedly a really healthy kickback happening, we're seeing it all over the place, at Cambridge University with Arif Ahmed leading a fight back and so on and so forth. The trouble is it has no discernible political strategy, and at some point, if we're going to stop this drift into what I believe will be a highly authoritarian system of politics, which will be liberal democratic in name only, we have to politically weaponize the movement for cultural freedom, and that means creating a coalition that straddles both the traditional centre-right and those factors of the left. And at some point we have to get together and devise that strategy. We don't have it yet. It's very much early days. Mm-hmm. And unless we do that, then the other side will just keep incrementally taking away, our capacity to speak and to use the word woman or man, ultimately. It'll be real 1984 type stuff.
So you've given us a fairly pessimistic view. How would you rate 2022 out of 10 as far as cultural affairs and freedom are concerned, where 0 is that we already live in North Korea, right, and 10 is that libertarian utopia has been achieved? Where would you put 2022 Britain on that spectrum?
I would put us at 5. So I think there's a lot more terrible stuff potentially to come, but there is the possibility of stopping it still. Right. We aren't actually living in North Korea or Iran yet. Mm-hmm. We haven't yet got formally a morality police, though the police are sort of slowly transforming themselves into that. But it's all to play for. Yeah. Okay. We're going possibly into extra time, say.
Wow, okay. So 2023 is going to be an important year.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting, but also very dangerous for us, I think.
Marc, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
And to you, sir.
Thanks for all of your work. Really enjoyed talking to you about 2022, a year in review. If you are not presently a subscriber to the IEA London YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please hit the thumbs up, like, and also hit the notification bell if you're a subscriber to make sure that you get informed of all our upcoming content, including Marc's regular show, The Parallax View, which regularly goes into these sort of issues about freedom of speech. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Over and out. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.